you have felt like, man, it's been denial upon denial, but something deep within you is saying to keep moving forward. I have this deep longing to impact the world. I wish God would just take that away from me. It is honestly something that I am still wrestling with a ton.
Welcome back to another episode of the New Rules Podcast. It's your girl, Breezy, and I am here with Mr. Adrian Crawford. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing very well, too. What is your hope for the week?
I think my hope for the week is to kind of get back into a rhythm. You know, the last probably 10 to 12 days been thrown out of rhythm because of actually a project and something good, but just has kept me pretty busy. But I know it will for the next few weeks. But again, trying to get back to some semblance of a rhythm would be awesome.
That's exciting.
It is. It's really cool. So you're going on a trip soon?
I am. Today is
Tuesday.
It doesn't matter what today.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm leaving tomorrow.
No.
I'm leaving tomorrow morning. So we're trading schedules.
We are.
You're going to be here, and then I'm going to be on a few different flights to Indianapolis and to New York for the next few days.
There you go, world traveler.
Yeah, for sure. World traveler, Indianapolis.
Indianapolis and New York City. There we go. But no, that should be cool. Sweet. What are we doing today?
So I'm really excited about today's episode. We're going to talk about what it takes to stay the course, even when you feel like nothing is happening. I'm really excited to talk about this because I do feel that a lot of our listeners find themselves in this place, whether it's the executive that we do consulting work with, whether it's the younger leader who's looking to start their own business. And I think that we just have such wisdom to speak on this topic, since so much of our story is that just because you experience a delay, it doesn't mean that there is denial. Just to start us off, can you talk a little bit about what you feel like has happened when you've decided to stay the course, even when you felt like there was no fruit?
Yeah. I think it's been a really interesting journey because I think that, over the last 20 years, I have done things and felt, different things I was supposed to do and didn't see the results ultimately I was hoping for. But what I'm starting to see now is some of those things that for years I just have been faithful and planted. I'm seeing those things start to actually come to pass, and they're coming to pass at a pretty rapid pace. And so I think that, but it's always hard because when you're in there, it's so complex. Life is complex. Life has so many layers. So sometimes we stay places we shouldn't stay. That because it's our codependency, or we feel if we're in this place it's going to give us greater level of significance. So we're driven by, we talk about a lot here, wrong motives, wrong intents, whatever. And so sometimes you're not meant to be there. We say it all the time is that, really great leaders and great people, they quit things all the time. So it's this balance. But then there's also times where, no, you're called to stay the course. And when you're staying the course, you won't do it perfect. There's times where wrong motives and intents may be there, but you still feel you're supposed to be there. And I think that's something that's really lost in our culture today, is the ability to actually stay the course at something, because a lot of times it's not the instant results that we may want to experience.
For someone who might be listening to the podcast for the first time, you have done many different things. And so when you start off the sentence saying, there have been many different things throughout my life that I've tried and I've had to stay the course throughout, would you mind sharing a few examples of what those things are?
Yeah, some of them I'll share, because it's very specific to me. Other ones I'll kind of just use kind of vague things. But one of them, because again, just what it actually represents and things
right,
like that.
To kind of honor other people that are involved.
Yeah, so one of them is that there's a, really a program that's really around, athletics. And for a long time, I just wanted to make an impact there. It means a lot to me, wanted to make an impact there. And so I would spend a lot of time just praying for that place, doing that. And there was at times where, there were some good things that were there, but then there's a lot of times, where honestly people knew that I was going to be there. So I don't think it was purposely, but what they would do is kind of use that, or they just would kind of, would allow me to still do some stuff to help them, but they were never being active and saying, man, how can we actually help you? How can we actually serve you? How can we actually give to you? And I just always said, I want to be able to influence this top to bottom. And so, through a series of events, I've been able to have the ability right now to really influence this, this athletic program top to bottom. And it's been really cool, but that's 20 years in the making of actually doing that. Equal Shot, we're running with JT, the idea of running a basketball academy, but also impacting those who don't have access to things. Well, I started almost 12 years ago, the idea of how do we go into rural areas to begin to give kids in those areas access to high-level skill development training. How do we give them access to human purpose development? How do we really change their lives? And so I started working on this 10 or 12 years ago, and there was a little bit of movement, but not a ton of it. But I believe laying the groundwork of that has allowed, now that we're stepping in with JT in our company Equal Shot, to where we're actually building that out, and watching the growth of that has been amazing. But that was something 10 to 12 years ago that I started working on. And so those are two examples of things to where, it was years of just doing stuff. And then finally you're like, oh, and you thought you were wrong for doing it. But I tell people, you're only responsible for what you feel like you're supposed to do there. You are responsible for results, but a lot of times results may not be what you think the results are supposed to be. That's what's really it takes. And I think that's probably a bigger thing. This idea of wisdom is so needed in that process.
Mm-hmm. Whenever we talked about this with our team, we do something called Culture Creators. You mentioned that it's not only about perseverance. So if it's not only about perseverance, what else is it about?
You have to persevere, but it's bigger than that. It's about building something that actually lasts. And so with building something that lasts, I think really good and impactful leaders are trying to build something that can outlast them, that they are willing to go the course. And a lot of times the long journey to get there builds the skills that you need in order to build something that can have longevity. Because on that journey, what you learn, if you're willing to stay the course, you actually get wisdom. See, wisdom is this ability to really be able to practically apply knowledge of things in a very complicated world. You're willing to take the best of things and be able to know how to apply it in a very complex world. And so I think a lot of times on the journey, you learn those things. Over the last 20 years, I've learned a lot of things that have now helped me to be able to now go into these new things that are opening up, to be able to build with wisdom, because I think that's what makes things last. I think a lot of times when you try to build things quick, you may have an idea, you may have a thought, and there may be some truth to it, but it's not wisdom. Wisdom just has this ability, such practical application, and that's how you build. And that's why perseverance is important. But as you persevere, if you persevere and continue to have the right mindset, you actually can gain wisdom. And wisdom is really the foundation of what builds something long term.
I think a starting point assumption is that people want to be builders. And that's not necessarily always the case. So I think it would be interesting for you to describe why we use the word architect here. Where did that come from? Because we do have an expectation, who's a part of our team here, that everyone has the perspective of an architect.
Yeah, because you think about an architect goes in there and they lay out the blueprint, the designs. They have to see where the air conditioned ducts are going to go. They have to go, where's wiring going to go? I mean, they have to really have a very clear thing to build, because an architect they lay out blueprints to build something that impacts a lot of people, whether it's a home, a building, an airport, a warehouse. It's going to impact people. And so that's why we do that here. We want people to understand that when you're here working for us, we're trying to build something. We're not just here to just be people who just work, but actually trying to build things that make impact, that actually lead to human flourishing. So we build companies that add value. We build nonprofits that add value. Even from when we're putting content out, we're doing that. Why? We want to do that because we want to add value. And so I think that that's how we want everyone to come in, to be that as a builder, because I believe to be a human being, I believe you're called to build. I believe you're called to build family. You're called to build relationships. You're called to build work into the earth, not just take, but actually be those who actually use their hands, their skill set, their ability to actually build something.
Can you share a little bit about how you have grown in thinking not just about the weeks and the months, but the decades?
Yeah. And that's, again, a very complex thing in life, because it's very important to be present. So, you have to be present in the day. We talk a ton about that, right? Being right here. But then also you do have to think about what you're trying to get to in the future. And so the thing about it, I think it goes to the idea how you begin to learn how to lead in decades is not when it becomes so much about the results matter, right? We aren't just doing stuff just to do it. But when you feel like a result, I've got to get this result because it's going to do something for me. That is when people begin to shorten the process. But I think what I began to realize was that, man, no, genuinely, I want to do stuff in the world and into the earth that actually adds real value to people and not just think about just the moment. And so I could learn how to be present in the moment, but also be present while I could build something, because I began to really check, when I started to get really anxious about, we got to get this done, this has to happen. A lot of times when I get anxious about it, it's about something that is going to be whether it's a benefit for me or it's a fear. Man, we got to get this done because we don't know who's going to payroll this. And instead of no, trust the process of what we're building, and then long term know that it's going to pay off. And so it's just this kind of nuance that you have to constantly battle with, is being present, but then also building. And I will tell you, building for me has been simply about the results being, if I keep my mindset and I want results for the betterment of others, then that's when I can continue to keep a long-term mindset.
So you would say that you've adjusted the scoreboard from being maybe visibility or some external opportunity to results equal that you've added value at the highest capacity that you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because I think that's the world we're entering into. I actually believe that many people, and this may be something we do on another episode, but I believe that those who make real impact in life is those who can actually operate in those ideas of the shadows, because in the shadows, no one knows you're there and you can actually get things done. I've realized that, but that is one of those things inside of me personally that really does push against me, because I've mentioned it, because I want to be, because of real life, real events, real things that happened to me growing up. I want to be seen. I want to be known. But honestly, as I said before, I believe your calling kills your idolatry. Your calling kills the things you worship. And for me, a lot of my calling is being in the shadows. It is actually being the person helping move things around, but doing it in the dark. Doing what I mean by in the dark, not in secrecy or deception, but doing it in a way to where I may not be the front person. And it's really weird, because in the organization I lead, I am the front person. Do podcasts, do things, people know who I am. But then it's really interesting for people to see me in certain environments and certain spaces, and then all of a sudden they're like, what in the world? And it's well, I'm actually helping to impact people and to influence people in a good way that goes to human flourishing. And so I think that I said all that to say that when you're building out and you're going in the future, I do believe impact's going to be those who are really about, it's not about if I'm the one bringing it, but I just want to bring whatever that thing is. I want to bring it to earth. I want to bring it. And I think those are going to be the ones who have power, impact, and influence in the future.
Whenever you're building something that lasts, you have to be able to envision a new reality, a different future. You are somebody who is quite nihilistic. How have you practiced in your mind envisioning a future that is better than the one that, if you're left to yourself, that you think is going to play out?
Yeah. Honestly, my faith actually does that, because left to myself, I am very nihilistic, very let's burn the whole thing down, right? But what I do believe, in my faith, is that it's always been meant to be a place to be redeemed. You know what I mean? I believe that that's one of the clear messages in all of the Bible is redemption and restoration. And so that's what keeps me there, is the idea of man, when I leave the earth, is the earth better restored in the places and spaces I was at? Are there more people who've had a sense of finding calling and purpose? Man, are there people living more authentic? Are there more people who are building and being able to walk in community? People found relationships with other people. They never would have relationships if it wasn't for the space we created. Was it allowing people to find and be able to launch into what they've been actually able to do? So I was able to create things so people can then begin to walk in their actual purpose and calling. See, that is how you begin to make those things happen. Is my family better? My kids better? Is it family line that I have? Is it better? I think that is what has really changed me, is that idea of restoration and making the world actually better. And the one thing is this: when you're making the world better, because when people talk like this, it can feel like this very this thing that where it's oh man, yeah, you care about humanity, but man, I got to make money. I want to be successful. I just have learned man, when you just take care of others and you really build products and you really you bring things to the table that is for the flourishing and the betterment of other human beings, you make money. You're able to have influence. You're able to do things you never thought you'd be able to do. I never thought I'd be in the position that I'm in certain places, but it has been that thing on the forefront. How do I add value to wherever I go, to the people that I'm around?
Mm-hmm. You said that movements don't start with crowds, they start with consistency. What is an example of a small act that you're doing right now that you believe will shape the future that might be getting overlooked?
I think that this idea of what we're doing with this podcast, or this whole movement of human purpose development really isn't a category right now. I think it's a category we are birthing and we're starting. The fact of, man, people, I believe, have been hardwired with purpose, and I believe that we are living in an era and a time to where those things have been robbed. There's been a counterfeit that's been given to the world of that. What people think their purpose and calling and authenticity is whatever they feel, whatever their desires want to go. But a lot of times those desires and feelings and things are actually motivated and were birthed out of deep places of pain, insecurity, I think the idea of envy and on and on. And I think this movement, because I believe we're going to help a ton of people, that's going to go to, because I believe when people really understand purpose and calling and really live authentically, it leads to human flourishing. And so I believe that we'll look 20 years from now and there really will be a movement. There'll be a movement. I believe we're going to have human purpose development centers all throughout the world to where people can come in and have a great sense of finding out actually who they've been hardwired to be. So then they can go into the world and add that type of value to the world from there.
The idea of building in the dark sounds quite noble until you are actually practicing it, and it does not feel that way at all. So I think it would be interesting for you to share a little bit about how you've wrestled with your perspective, and be transparent about our approach to you even in the podcast.
Yeah. I think that building in the dark, yeah, it is. It sounds very noble. And most people say, yeah, I'm just humble. I'm just doing that. But deep inside, for me personally, I want to shine. You know what I'm saying? There's more that idea, you know what I'm saying? I shine, we shine, but at the end of the day, what I've come to this place is that it really is that it's a dying to self. Because when I want to, I've been on stages preaching in front of thousands of people. I've done certain things. And in that, I've done that, and I've always hoped to do that. But the problem with that is once I got there, it's you want more. It's a never satisfying thing. And so I have to constantly wrestle with those things. I have to constantly wrestle with knowing man, I really help people, get into places and spaces. And I was one of the fundamental reasons why they did that, and will never get credit for it. But what I've been constantly wrestling with is that, what was the result and the goal of what we set out to do? Did that get done? Okay, if that's the case, then why do I have to get credit for that? Why do I have to be the one that, the world now sees, oh, he's the kingmaker now, right? He's the one behind the scenes doing this, da-da-da. It's because it's a lot of insecurity. And I think that's what has been the thing for me, is just more and more becoming secure and knowing who I am, what I'm called to do, and that if I know, and those who love me know, that I do make this type of impact, why is that not enough? Why do I have to go and these people have to see me? Why when I walk in the room, oh man, I hope they know who I am. The truth be told is that when you look at our country, you look throughout history, the most powerful people are literally people that no one has any idea. Man, we look at our current cultural moment politically. People see Donald Trump, they see Elon Musk. But there's somebody behind the scenes that's actually doing that, are probably the most powerful person. I think Peter Thiel, who Sequoia Capital. Peter Thiel is one of the most powerful people in the world right now, because he orchestrates a ton of the stuff that's going on. But again, it's people that are in the shadows. People know who he is, but man, the actual impact of what he's doing is being pulled from other places. And so anyway, all that being said, it's just one of those things. And I even think with the podcast, like you asked, what we're doing here is that we just have stuck with it. And that's a lot of credit to you, because for me, it's man, I wanted this thing to pop. I want it to go. I want it to go viral, do all the stuff. But what we've come to is just realizing that, man, whoever connects with our community, we want them to connect with our community. And this is about us crafting messages, putting things out. And I think what's going to happen with our podcast is that in the future, people are going to, they're going to catch on. They're going to, and go back through all of our stuff. And it's going to be archived, and they're going to learn more. And then it'll just be, and people are going to be like, man, they just popped up on the scene. It'll be like, no, there's just been years of this type of work that we've been doing.
Yeah. Who do you know that builds in the dark with resilience?
Johnny Ives, who was with Apple for a long time. I thought as a designer, he was known for his design. Steve Jobs pulled him up, but you think about a lot of the beautiful designs and patents in Apple, it was between Steve and Johnny that did those things. Now again, a lot of people know him because of how Apple blew up, but for a long time, he was just someone who was just a designer in his lane, building it out. I mentioned, again, these people, I'm not talking about moral character or anything like that. I'm talking about how they build in the shadows, right? Mm-hmm. Peter Thiel's one who I think builds in the shadows, that I think does that and builds it out. Trying to think of somebody else. Why am I forgetting somebody?
Maybe they're just hidden.
I know, right?
Maybe you're overlooking them.
Oh my gosh. I guess somebody. There was a guy, he's no longer alive, but a guy by the name of Bill Campbell. Bill Campbell was known, they call him the $1 trillion coach, because he was the coach for the guys at Google, Steve Jobs, the guys, who else was it? Bill Gates. I mean, pretty much anybody in the tech Silicon Valley world, he was the guy who was the actual coach of them. And no one really, I mean, people in that world knew who Bill was. But as he passed away, the guys at Google ended up writing a book about all the things they learned from him. And it's fascinating, but he was one of those guys that, like, man, he just was very straightforward. He was sitting meetings with people, but he really, he sat on boards and everything, but like the world didn't know Bill Campbell, right? But he literally, and they all say this, they're like, man, I would not be, our company wouldn't be, we wouldn't have been who we were if it was not for Bill Campbell. But he was a guy who lived in the shadows as a coach, and he had his own leadership in his own way, but he really did. And so I would encourage that. The book, The $1 Trillion Coach, is a fascinating read about him.
So I think an interesting example is like this week, some of the projects that I'll be participating in, because I've been thinking about this, and you referenced it a little bit before for experiences for you. It's like I'll be in a room, I'll be doing a specific thing, but there's this whole other world of things that I actually do that's not even going to be a conversation. Like it's not even going to be a conversation, and some of that is in the necessary invisibility factor. And so, but practically when you think about that, that's when people find themselves in the position of, I want you to know what I do and what I'm about, so that you can bring traction and visibility to this place that I love and that I nurture and, you know, that I care for. When you're in those moments and you're making the decision whether you are or are not going to share what you do, how do you make that decision, especially without violating authenticity?
That's a great question, and it is honestly something that I am still wrestling with a ton. I don't do that well at times. But I become way more aware. But you know, when I walk away, I'm like, why did I share that? There's no need to share that. Even like recently, it was like this past weekend, that I was in there in a room and I'm just talking, and it's like I'm sharing about stuff. I'm like, and then I walked away. I'm like, why did I share that? And it's what you're saying. It's like, oh, I want people to know that, oh, I'm actually good at this. I want people to know that, man, look, I'm doing all these other things. I want people to know da da da. And I think how you manage it is, it's being someone who comes in the room, and it's more how I do it. It's like, it's really being present. So a lot of times for me, what I begin to do is, okay, why am I sharing what I'm sharing? And I try to let people pull those things out of me versus me just saying, hey, here's all the stuff that I do. And so, because what you end up doing is, when you do that, you always find yourself like waiting for the opportunity to just share what you do, and not listening to the person and not adding value to the person. And what I've come to this place of understanding is that when this stuff starts to happen, most of the movement and things that we have just been through years of just taking care of people. It wasn't me sharing these things. Oh, I do this. It just comes up in casual conversation. Oh yeah, this, and this. Oh really? Yeah. And this, and that's kind of it. But I think that sometimes you're like, no, if I do this, this person's going to be the person that leads there. And here's the truth about it. That person usually isn't the person that gets you there. It's some random person you had no idea. You're just really cool with. You're like, oh yeah, I'm connected to this person. And they tell somebody about you, and the things go from there. Like, you know, we have a client right now that's doing some really, really cool work in the world. But that came through a good friend of ours, Vince Hunt. Me and Vince have just been friends for over like 10 years. Vince and I have done work. I'm a guy who calls in. Vince has added value. I've added value to Vince. I'll call, check in on Vince, hope he's doing, all these things, and we work in certain environments together. But this group came up, they called him, and he was like, yeah, that's not kind of the work, but I got the person who can do that work for you. And because of our relationship, he does this. So now we're entering into a new market of real influence and impact, simply because of a good relationship with Vince. Vince was like, oh yeah, absolutely, that's my guy. This is who you need to call, no doubt about it. And they knew Vince because of the work he's done, and because of that, Vince saying it valid. He was like, oh, just because Vince said, they're like, oh, absolutely, let's go with this group right here. So anyway, that's how this stuff works out. So I know that's a lot, but I think it just really comes down to this idea of being in a room and just, again, we keep saying, just add value. Don't go in there trying to, I got to show everyone. Let me just go in here and let me just do my job and add value. And if people pull that out of me, absolutely, I'm ready to rock and roll and share what we do. But yeah.
That was going to be my next question, because we say wisdom is a road, there's ditches on either side, and I feel like we can fall to the other side of the ditch too.
Yes.
Where then the opportunity happens, someone's like, oh, what do you do, how did you end up here? And then suddenly you're so insecure about the stories that you're like, I want to have the opportunity to share this. So how do you navigate that piece of it?
Just being able to be clear of knowing what you want to share. We do so much. Again, I end up doing a lot of things. So it's kind of hard when you're in those moments, because it's the difference if I says, oh, if I walk in the room, like, oh yeah, I'm a coach, or, oh, I'm a analyst, or I'm an accountant, whatever. You can be like, okay, great, people know that. But when you walk in there, you say, oh yeah, I'm an authenticity designer. What the frick is that? You know what I'm saying? They're like, what is that? And
it's
then,
like you have 2 seconds to respond, and everything that we do
Yes,
is going through
everything.
your head, and you're
I'm
like,
like,
which one do I choose and how do I describe it?
I know,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh, authentic. So now what I've been working on is being able to say, hey, when I walk in a room, someone asks me, oh, here's what I do. And then I'm able to see, okay, do I have very clear pictures on all the things we do? And then it becomes like this thing in my mind, like this like computer going off. So I'm like, okay, I'm this. Okay, what would probably be something, I'm trying to use discernment. What would be something good to share here? So I'm like, oh, this person cares about this. Let me pull this up. Oh, one of the things I do is this right here. And so, but I always try to tell the main thing, man, I really believe in authenticity. And so I always talk about that. Like that's always at the foundation core of what I talk to people about, is this idea of authenticity.
I think it'd be interesting too to think through in the moment, not what should I share that will prove that I'm valuable, but what should I share that could potentially add value to this person.
That's a really good point. Yeah, it's because I think it's always the biggest thing you do, right? So it's like, oh yeah, you want to share, I work with this person, or man, we do these things. Yeah. It's like, and so you're like, okay, no, but what do they need? What would help them? And so that is a great point. So again, you just have to be in the room. And that's why we always talk about your internal frameworks have to be in check, because those insecurities come out and cause you to embellish. It can cause you to then, like you as well, like to undersell yourself and just kind of, whatever. And so I think that's where you have to have those things in check, use wisdom to be able to do it. But yeah, I love what you said. How do we add value to that person?
I have a question.
Okay, sir. Go.
This is more what you were talking about earlier, but in the past you've talked about how you will know, or you should know, if you should be doing something or not because of the evidence of your work. And that feels like that contradicts delays versus denials.
Yep.
How do you discern between I should not be doing this and this is just a delay?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. Lawrence just asked this question, and the question she asked was that, we'll talk about how one of the ways to know you're doing something right. I've said this is like the evidence of it. But then I'm also saying right now is that sometimes, when you're building something, you don't see the evidence, but you're still supposed to go. So it can seem very contradictory. And again, a lot of times in life, it's true. I think what I mean is that I think a lot of times what we look at is external fruit, right? A lot of times what we're saying is like, oh, and what I mean by external results, it's okay, we are moving forward. It could be, man, I got multiple jobs that I'm doing now, people, multiple clients, people are hiring me. So that means I'm on the right path. That could be it. But then what if you don't have that, but internally you're really growing? Like you're growing in character, you're growing in like patience, you are some of the internal things that I've been wrestling with. You're like, there, like right now, like, I know there's some things that, Lauren, that you're actually going through and working through. Now, with your talent, I believe in the future, there are going to be so many more things that you do, but also you're here and you feel like you're supposed to be here because there's a lot of internal things that are going on and you're seeing actual results from there. And so I think that's the difference, is flipping, is the idea of we all want, when we think of results, we think it's just external results. Sometimes it's just internal results that are actually doing that as well. And you have small glimpses of results externally. That's why I see some external glimpses, but then realizing how much the internal stuff was actually happening within.
Yeah, and I feel like internally things begin to develop, and then within the next season you see the fruit of the internals you just developed, but then you're also developing the next layer of internals that you need to develop for the next season.
One of my favorite verses is from the Psalm 1, where it talks about this idea of being planted by streams of water, and it says you produce fruit in every season. And when I'll never forget reading that and studying that, it wasn't about just like, external fruit, But you think about before actually a plant produces fruit, there's stuff internally that's actually happening. So in every season, you think about this, in every season, there has to be an end. So you think about like, man, all of a sudden, we're here in Florida right now and like, man, pollen's everywhere because, you're like, I can't stand it. But it's like pollen's everywhere because why? There's about to be this new life, new birth, things like that. And then you think about fall. Fall comes up and this is amazing. It's the brightest and, you go to New York, whatever, the prettiest it is right before it's about to die, right before the leaves are all falling off and things like that. But again, there's internal things and external things that are actually happening all the time. And I think that when you are planted and understand where you're at, who you're with, are you in the right space, I believe you're called to produce fruit. And if you're not producing external fruit or internal fruit and internal things, I think that is a sign that maybe you need to go somewhere else.
Can you tell a story about a time where you thought that the delay was a denial, believing that actually shaped you and gave you more internal resilience, and then you realize later that what you learned in that previous season was exactly what you needed to show up in the next one?
Oh yeah, a great one would be, and I've mentioned I think maybe before in the pod, is that when I was doing basketball skill training, because I always had a desire to impact beyond just one small sector. And I'll never forget, I would sit in my therapist's office and I would tell him, I'm like, I have this deep longing to impact the world. But I used to say, man, I wish God would just take that away from me, because I feel like it's just I feel like it was like this cruel joke, because I'm like, man, I have this desire to do this, but I'm like, okay, I'm right here in Tallahassee doing basketball skill training in this academy, whatever. But little did I know was that in that time where I felt like it was a denial, was actually development. You know what I'm saying? A lot of times you think what denial is. Denial many times is actually internal development. And so what it was doing for me in that moment was actually producing things and learning how to develop. Even though I was developing basketball players, I was actually learning how to develop humans, understanding who they were. That's what I was really good at as a trainer. I could figure out who you were, convince you of who you were, and then build a skill set to actually help you remain. And so now you think about what we do: self-awareness, resilience to remain self-aware, and then using that ability to go empower and do that. I learned all of that being on a court training people. When I thought that, man, my impact in the world was this basketball, that's not going to do this, is training. But I was learning a skill set that now is really impacting people across really our country and the world because of the fact that what I thought was a denial. So that's a very practical thing in that moment. And again, it's so difficult sometimes because, and here's what I say, in our world and society today, and I get it, people have not been built because we've been told every environment that we go into that may be difficult and tough can seem to be toxic, can seem to be, it could be committing some type of like psychological harm, things like that. And again, I think we all know, and we should know, when we're in an environment that's really, really unhealthy. I'm not talking about staying in an environment that's physically abusive, an environment where you go in and people are, where there's racism, misogyny, all stuff like that. But what I also say is that, man, when you look through life, and even in my own life, there's been some environments where people would have said it was really toxic for me, and it was, but I felt like I was supposed to be there. And it didn't make sense. It was toxic. That's what's crazy. I've been in some environments I worked in or I was there that were really toxic, where people were actually doing things to manipulate me. But I felt like I was supposed to stay there. And it was the wild. Now I look at it now and I'm like, oh, I would not be who I am if I did not stay there. And so I think we have to be very careful in that, because I get it. People can stay because their own brokenness and things like that, or and some things off to where they'll stay in places they shouldn't stay in. But also on the other side of it, some of the worst environments I've been in leadership have been some of the best environments that have shaped the good parts of my leadership, because I saw how that impacted people. I saw how they got down that road. And instead of judging them, I'm saying, man, how do I learn not to do that? And it's now, I think, led to good leadership. And so not every environment. And again, I want to be careful because I don't want people to, you have to live on your own convictions. And so I think that's the first thing. But sometimes you may be in a tough spot. I mean, you think about it, you read throughout history, there are people just in really bad situations at times that felt like they were supposed to stay, that then led to that type of impact.
How did you remain in a posture of learning rather than just staying there and being bitter?
Man, it was being honest, being very honest in how I would verbally process what was going on internally. So I've mentioned this before, I have this thing called dump the box, right? And so that was one of the ways I would do it. Now, when I dump the box, I do it through prayer. And so it sounds there for a lot of people when they think of prayer, it's like, hey, just present your requests, whatever. For me, prayer, and I know this was prayer is a conversation. So I was honest. So it would be like I would just be praying and I was being very honest with God, very clear. I mean, stuff that was the dark parts of my soul, things that I really was struggling with, things that I had fears of, my anger toward others. I would be willing to do that because I think you have to be willing to do that. Now, yours may not be that, maybe writing. It may be writing stuff. It may be through music, song, whatever. I don't know. But you have to be willing. I tell people you have to be willing to clear out your system emotionally. So how I got out of that place of not being bitter is clearing out my system emotionally. I had to constantly say where I was at and be very honest. So that could be in therapy. That could be with a friend, wherever it is. But most people, what we will tend to do is not be honest with ourselves. We'll either be like overly positive and optimistic, or we'll be on the other end of the spectrum of like, it's all burning, versus saying, no, you can say it's all burning, but there's still hope. Or you can be optimistic, but you do have to face reality. And I think the more you can clean out your system emotionally, the more it keeps you from being bitter, because bitterness grows down and it becomes an infection emotionally that will destroy your life. And the way that you fight against it is kind of like a filtration system in a fish tank or whatever. You got to clean it out in order to make sure that it stays pure through that process. And one of the ways to do is by verbally processing or writing or communicating exactly where you're at in the real hard parts of your life. Well, hey guys, I hope today was actually helpful for you. And here's my encouragement and my challenge to you. Some of you have been on the road right now, and that road that you've been on, you have felt like, man, it's been denial upon denial, but yet and still something deep within you is saying to keep moving forward. And my encouragement to you out of my own journey in my own life and journeys of so many different leaders that I've read about is that they just kept moving forward. And that they trusted in the end that the results were going to be there. And so what I want to encourage you all with today is this, is to go back and reflect on the moment down this road and what have you learned? Where have you grown? Maybe it's internal things that all of a sudden you may not have seen the external things, but man, you have grown in your character, your patience, your wisdom, your understanding. People have noticed that about you. And man, that's a huge thing. And so maybe you've really probably experienced growth, but maybe not the growth that you've hoped for. But I'm telling you, as you stay down the pathway and move forward, you actually will begin to see that. Don't let those denials stop you from being persevering and to move down to actually accomplishing the things that you were put here to do. Until next time, keep writing the rules.